Welcome to our Instagram Live here at Costa Brown. For those of you who are returning, longtime listeners, hopefully we'll have some first-time callers. Welcome back. For those of you new to watching our Instagram Lives here at KB, welcome. My name is Regina Sanz. I'm joined by our winemaker, Julian Housepian, and first time joining us on our IG Live, but been here at KB for some years now, is our Director of Hospitality, Paige Dana. Hello, Paige.
Hello.
Welcome. I'm going to take a minute here and talk a little bit about Paige's background and history. Not only is she a pretty incredible hospitality director here at the property and has welcomed many wonderful guests over the years, she also joins us from a restaurant industry background, Michelin restaurant sommelier we got right here. So I'm going to pick on her a little bit today and talk about some of the wines that we're going to enjoy. But we are here to talk about our 2021 vintage release of our estate wines. This is the most coveted release wines. These are our longest wait, save our 4-barrel. Usually about 6 years waiting to get access to these wines. So for those still waiting, thank you for your patience. I promise when your name comes up, your number comes up, these wines will be worth the wait. For those of you that already have access, do please log into your account. The release is live, and secure some of your favorites that hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about today. So with that, to kick us off, we're going to taste 5 wines today. And I think what we should do, Julian, is we should taste by the vineyard. So we'll do Chardonnay, Pinot, Pinot, like a little dance. If you've got any questions, do please put them into the chat. I'll do my best to speed read and try to address any of the questions that you have. We're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to come and actually visit us here at KB. And we're going to enjoy some really good wine today. So, Julian, let's kick it off. Let's talk just a little bit about the 2021 vintage, especially now that what I love most about our estate wines is they have a little bit more time in bottle, and talk maybe a little bit about what bottle age does for our wines. Again, a little bit about that vintage, how you're seeing that vintage as it's had yet another year in bottle to progress. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, starting with the 2021 vintage, I mean, it was really, truly a spectacular vintage. Growing season was, other than a little bit of frost at the beginning of the season, a good growing season is a growing season that there's not a lot of stuff to talk about, because the conditions were great. The temperatures were nice and warm. There wasn't a lot of rain or anything major in the summertime. There was no significant heat waves. I mean, it was a really, really gentle, very, very graceful, beautiful growing season. And what really made it so incredible is that everything kind of played out the way that we envisioned it to be in typical conditions every year. Russian River is typically the first appellation to get ripe, so we picked through that the Russian River, and then there's a little bit of crossover with Santa Rita, and then a little bit of Sonoma Coast, and then San Lucia Highlands, Sonoma Coast. So everything came in, apart from one another, which allowed us to really pick exactly when we wanted to. The last time that happened is in 2018 when we had a long harvest season. So that allowed us to really truly make the wines, exactly how we wanted them to be. And now that it's been over a year since these wines have been in bottle, I think at every scale, whether we're talking about the regional appellation wines, every appellation is tasting so beautifully, distinctly different. Like the differences in the appellations are so purely and easily found. And I think that's really a neat experience. And then when you go into a little bit more of a deep dive into the vineyards themselves, you're able to really kind of see the difference between each of these vineyards too, very, very easily. Sometimes, of course, it's a little bit more difficult to notice. You have to be paying attention, but we drink the wine to enjoy it, and sometimes we drink the wine to think deeply about it. This vintage, I think, is a year where you can do both at once quite easily, and really easily recognize the difference. So for me, this is fun because these vineyards, and these vineyards being the top tier of our wines, it's, I would say, generally speaking, a little bit easier to really enjoy and identify the differences. But this year, it's just, they're so pure, they're so beautiful. And, I think it's well documented that Treehouse, is my favorite vineyard. It's
That's
just
true.
so, it's just so consistent, and it's such a beautiful wine. But I'm really pleased because this year, Cerise and Bootleggers Pinot are giving it a run for their money, because those wines are really also exceptional, and they're competing with my fave right now. So that's good stuff, though.
Well, let's
So
jump in and
yeah,
taste some wine. Let's
yeah,
north to south it. We'll start out with the 2021 Cerise Chardonnay. And I think we should talk about, certainly we should talk about the vineyard and sort of how the 21 has evolved, and or rather how the 21 tastes in glass. But we also are doing a little really special thing for special list members that have really been on our journey with us, and we're doing a tiny release of the 2017 vintage Cerise as well, which I'm going to lob that one over to Paige. Julian, why don't we start off talking a little bit about Cerise Vineyard and in what we're actually getting in the glass. And Paige, I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about what you see with older Chardonnays. I love older Chardonnays, but I'd love your perspective on that as well.
Absolutely. Older Chardonnay is beautiful.
yeah. So Cerise Vineyard is located about an hour and a half north of Sebastopol, northwest, in the town of Boonville. So if you continue on Highway 101, and you'll take the Highway 128 towards the town of Mendocino, and along the way you'll come across Boonville, and it's a really beautiful, old, kind of quaint town. It has a little bit of a vibe that's like stuck in time. Um, and so the vineyard itself is 300 acres, the property, and only 60 acres is planted. And we definitely, have planted every square inch of dirt that we can. And so what that tells you is that 240 acres of this property is really too steep. The ground is too unstable. It's just, you can't plant in these areas, right? So it's a big piece of land, but it's a rough terrain. And this is a little bit of a bear to farm. It's difficult, it's challenging, it's steep. The hillsides are, pretty extreme. Tractor driving is difficult. There's a lot of handwork that needs to be done. So it's a rugged and rough vineyard. It's kind of, the first time I saw it, I got goosebumps because it was, we were pursuing purchasing it, and I got winemaker goosebumps, because you see it from the valley floor. You're like, that's Cerise. That's so cool, and then I would say that the growers, sometimes they're like, oh, that place is such a pain, because it's hard work. So, and then we get the benefit of just making the wine. But it's a beautiful area, and the Chardonnay is located at the very bottom of the vineyard. So it's in this really beautiful little, cool little pocket. It's got a little bit heavier soils, which is good for Chardonnay. And I don't know if I could say with 100% confidence the coolest part of the vineyard, but being low lying and in a little bit of a bowl, the cool air kind of floats down the hillside there, and it does settle in some of these lower lying areas. So this is particularly in one of those spots.
And
The Chardonnay,
it's only 6 acres, right? It's this really
it's
tiny
very
planting.
small. Oh yeah,
So super limited,
yeah,
super small. And I love that you made a reference to it's a bear of a vineyard, because that's also one of the critters
yeah,
that we have at the vineyard
yeah,
is actual
yeah.
bears. Wild boar
A
too,
lot of
right, Julian? Wild turkey, wild
yeah,
boar, bears. I mean, this place is
coyotes,
rugged
mountain
as
lions,
it
yeah,
gets.
yeah,
As rugged as it
yeah.
gets.
But the
Paige?
wine, to be honest, it's really gorgeous. Like you can't, the wine itself is really a beautiful wine, and it's even, in my opinion, one of the rounder, more like supple, kind of more soft, pleasurable wines. There's good acid in there, but it's hidden, and it's really, really well balanced. So,
Paige, what are you getting? Talk to us about Chardonnay. Paige and I both love Chardonnay a
I
lot.
do love Chardonnay. I think Chardonnay can get a bad rap, but when you have really beautiful Chardonnay, and we are lucky to have phenomenally beautiful Chardonnay here at Costa Brown, it's just such a pleasure to drink on its own, and it's such a magical pairing wine as well. So it's just always a go-to for me. And the cerise has, I mean, to Julian's point, it has this like ripe pear lushness, you know, when
Ooh,
you get like a
yeah.
really perfect pear, and you just bite into it and you're like, oh yeah, like it has this just really beautiful balance. Um, and I think sense of place too. Cerise is such a, I've been lucky enough to be up there and driving past those vineyards too, and it's just really evocative. Um,
We've had such a fortune to make wine now in California, in Oregon, and on into Burgundy. And what's really standing out to me in this moment, and so forgive the folks that know this or have heard me say this before, in the world of Chardonnay, unlike many other varietals or varieties of grapes, in the world of Chardonnay wine, you can have everything from super, super, super crisp, lean Chablis, literally take the enamel off your teeth, sucking on lemons, which I love, all the way to really, really, really rich and robust and lots of oak and lots of lees contact, very buttery, very unctuous. And then you sort of have something in between. For me, if we're right in the middle of that scale, I would say Cerise is still, this Chardonnay especially, I do get a really bright, fresh acidity in this wine. So I'm not ripping the enamel off your teeth, Chablis. There's sort of a Merceau thing happening. Paige, what do you
oh,
think? Julian, what do you think? Just
absolutely.
looking
I
at those
think,
wines.
you know, Julianne, this is, I mean, kudos to you, but I think our Chardonnay program in general is always something that I'm so excited to try as they come out. I think balance is really the word that I would use with these wines. To your point, Regina, Chardonnay can very quickly tip in one direction or another. It's subject to peer pressure, and these just find these like really beautiful. You know, the acid is there, there's structure there, there's ripeness, but it's not. I mean, these wines are aged in oak, and you wouldn't guess that, right? Like they have this, they're really harmonious, and that's a credit to your winemaking. But they're just so. I think I already said this, but pleasurable, you know, I mean, and you want to revisit it too. I mean, they're dynamic, they're layered. And I would agree, Regina, this and the bootlegger, like take me to Merceau. If I was going to think of another Chardonnay region, you get that touch of like California warmth without it becoming overwhelming. And the acid allows it to age, you know, I mean, it really keeps it going, which is always delightful.
Julian, talk about Chardonnay in the cellar, because you know that we always talk a lot about Pinot Noir and the challenges that it presents in the vineyard. Talk about the counterpoint between those two and sort of how you like to treat Chardonnay in the cellar, or anything really interesting about winemaking on this particular wine.
yeah, you know, Pinot definitely gets the attention when it comes to the heartbreak grape, and
Yeah.
everyone it's well chronicled how difficult it is to grow Pinot Noir, and to make Pinot Noir. Um, but you know, Chardonnay, I would say, you know, it's a little bit easier to grow Chardonnay. It does have its, you know, difficulties, but Chardonnay is a hard wine to make. I mean, it's like the inverse of the growing story of Pinot, because it's so transparent. Like Paige mentioned, it's really easy to get into, you know, either too, you know, one thing or another, too rich or too lean or too acidic or too oaky or too buttery. Like it's really easy to fall into one of those corners, and to make a balanced wine is difficult. But not only that, they take a long time to ferment. You know, for example, right now, it's January 11th, and we still probably have like at least three-quarters of our Chardonnay from the 2023 vintage still fermenting,
Oh well.
which is not unusual. But you know, it takes a long time for these wines to go sugar dry as well as ML dry. So there's obviously the two fermentations that need to take place. And so in a cellar, they require a a lot of attention. And, when we pick them a little bit on the earlier side. And we go through full ML, which is the secondary fermentation that converts malic acid, which is a little bit more tart, and apple acid, and it converts it to lactic acid, which is a little bit of a rounder, softer acidity. And we go full ML because since we do pick the grapes a little earlier, it is important to soften the acid profile. We pick them early. The winemaking is very, very hands off. It's native fermentation for primary and secondary. We do something called hyperoxidation, which is a process in which we are actively blowing oxygen into the juice itself. So at the very, very first stage, when the wine is coming out of the press, we are, essentially trying to integrate oxygen into the juice. It becomes really brown. And then over the course of the fermentation, the color, the brown oxidized colors fall out of the wine, and you have a very stable color. So our wines, as they age, they are, they start off as like a little bit of you have a green hue in it, but with a little bit of you can see a little bit of like a little bit of a brown complexion, but this wine, the color does not change. I mean, we were tasting a 2017 Cerise this weekend, and the color is it's the same. So it's a stable color, and that's partially due to the hyperoxidation that we do at the juice stage. And then, of course, it goes to barrel. We bring it outside. That's our mechanism to help warm the juice up. And over the course of 2 or 3 days after that, the fermentation starts. And then, we do a little bit of stirring, but really it's just at that point about managing the temperature, making sure that things don't get too warm or too cold, and keeping a close eye on the fermentation. And then, like I said, things usually stall, and slow down quite a bit. And then we we top the barrels up, fill them up, and then just age them, and we wait for them to go dry. So it's quite a long process, but it's well worth the wait. And then these wines, I would also say the Cerise and the Bootleggers, we bottle them unfiltered. So we really like to, have a little bit of the, the unfiltered character to the wine in the bottle. It helps age the wines a bit longer. It makes them a little bit more complex, and we love the kind of the character and the uniqueness that comes out in these wines as unfiltered bottling.
Well, 2 things I wanted to say. There was a question in the comments. Will this be saved? Yes, it will be. Once we've finished this recording, we'll upload it into our Instagram account. And as a matter of fact, you can go back and see previous Instagram lives as well. So yes, if you want to revisit, see all my bad jokes twice, go for it. Speaking of bad jokes, full ML, I feel like sounds like a really excellent dance move, or perhaps something you might get in trouble by doing, like if you go full ML. But just a quick comment on malolactic fermentation, or ML, kind of shorthand that we use here in the cellar. I think ML and malolactic fermentation in general kind of got a bad rap over its lifetime. There was a period of time where the term malo, or malolactic fermentation, or ML, was really synonymous with wines that were also very, very oaky and or very, very lees heady, or have spent a lot of time in a more unctuous style. But malolactic fermentation happens in all wine, and when done with precision, as Julian is describing, there's nothing buttery or oaky or musky that sometimes excessive malolactic fermentation, or malolactic fermentation that isn't also handled with care and balance in the wine. It's just a distinction point, because I get that question a lot. Oh, it's full ML and full oak. It's like, well, that doesn't mean, in this case, it certainly does not mean that the wine's even remotely oaky or buttery. It's neither of those things. Paige, what are your thoughts on that? And also talk to me at the 17 Chardonnay, because I know that's one of your favorite wines from Cerise.
Absolutely. Everything you both said. I mean, I think to Julian's point, I mean, I think, Julian, you explained to me that going through full ML is what allows us to make the wine unfiltered, because that we know it will stay sound in the bottle, which is really important for aging. And I think, you know, a lot of people don't typically age their white wine in general. And I think that Chardonnay in particular, but a lot of white wine can really develop into something truly beautiful with age. And we are really lucky, or I personally am very lucky. We're currently pouring some of the 2017 in the hospitality program. So I get to check in on our 17 estate wines on a pretty regular basis. And I would say the Chardonnays are, I mean, they're singing. I mean, they still have time to go. I'm excited to see where they are in 6 months, a year. I think with age, you know, those beautiful fruit flavors you get, they just start to deepen and they broaden a little bit. And so you get this really flavorful mix, and different flavors start to come out a little bit more. And especially when you start talking about food pairing, that Chardonnay with a little bit of age is just going to be your best friend at the dinner table. For me, it's a celebration wine. You know, I mean, the bootlegger Chardonnay is one of my loves, the Cerise as well. And I think, you know, when you have a beautiful meal, whether it's Thanksgiving or Easter, any of these rich foods that you think about pairing maybe with a bigger red, you know, Chardonnay, it plays with it, it adds with it. You have that beautiful balance and acid, so it's refreshing. And so it's a real, I think it becomes a real treat to allow these wines to gain some maturity, you know, much like a person. You know, I don't know what I was like 5 years ago. I think maybe I've gotten better. You know, the wine has really developed as well. And to get to see it in those different stages is really exciting.
Yeah.
To tee us up for one thing that Paige was mentioning about our hospitality experiences here, Julian, why don't we taste the Pinot Noir, the Cerise Pinot Noir, and kind of start to ruminate on some thoughts on it. And Paige, tell us a little bit more about the hospitality experiences here at Kosta Browne. You know, your vision as we've collectively created over the years, and I'd love for you and Julian to talk a little bit too about the overlap between production and actually getting to visit here at the winery. It's pretty special in my opinion.
Absolutely. You know, when Regina and I were first speaking, before I joined the team, you know, the way she described Kosta Browne hospitality was as a thank you to our members, as a show of gratitude to all of our members, all of you that support us, as an opportunity to come and be here at the winery and get to experience the program, which like what could be more fun and better? Sign me up. And so over the last few years, we've really developed kind of a core group of tastings, and then we sprinkle those in with a lot of fun pieces. I am actually sitting in what was a converted production space. So the really cool thing about visiting Kosta Browne is this is the working winery. The hospitality spaces, our offices, everything are built around and in conjunction with the winery. We're not separate. And so you can't come here and not touch production in some way. And that is a really amazing experience. And Julian and our associate winemaker, Peter, and our whole cellar team is really phenomenal about participating with us. If you come to the winery and we do have an estate experience right now and participate in that, you get a full tour of the winery. So today, I think, are we racking today, Julian? I think I saw something going on down there. I haven't been totally through yet, but you come during harvest and you want to taste grapes that are coming in from the vineyard that morning. You can taste those grapes. You can look in a tank. When we're bottling, you can get up close and personal and see what that bottling line is. You're going to bump in to Julian doing tank samples and barrel samples, or the rest of our cellar team. And it's a really organic process that happens, and a really special way to get to experience the wine in a different way. You know, it takes a long journey to get into the bottle and get to you. And I think getting to see that piece of it and the real care that goes into it, I think that's the really special thing for me, getting to have the privilege of coming here on a daily basis is just really seeing the dedication and care that goes into taking care of these wines from start to finish. And Julian talking about the Chardonnay, you know, I mean, that's really fun for us as a team to tell people, you know, these wines in barrel are still fermenting, right? They're, you know, I think Peter likes to say dry by July, Julian. Is that the joke? And so, you know, you really get to put your hands on those barrels. I mean, it's a living thing. So you get to see all of that and be a part of that. And then you get to taste some great wine and hang out. And it's all of our experiences are fully private. So it's really just you and one of our great estate hosts getting to enjoy the space and the wine together. It's pretty special. If I do say so myself, I think it's pretty special.
Yeah.
I'd love to share.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, the harvest is the best time. I mean, you know,
best.
it's always cool to come check it out, but harvest is really special. The energy, the buzz. I mean, it's infectious. You know, like Paige was saying, tasting the grapes, putting your hand above a fermentation and feeling the heat coming off of it. This whole cluster, pick out a cluster, eat some partially fermented grapes. There's nothing better. It's the best.
We already have some really great one-liners coming out of this conversation. Go full ML and feel the heat. Like,
Going full
obviously, there's going to
ML.
be like a viral dance move that's going to happen soon.
Regina, you're in charge of choreographing the TikTok dances. Okay.
Lifelong goal. Really got to work on this team. I really got to do it. I wanted to share, you know, a kind of a personal story. One thing that really has stuck out to me over the many years that I've been fortunate to, in my role, I get to do a lot of wonderful wine dinners in incredible restaurants around the world. And an experience that really stuck out to me was a dinner that I did at the French Laundry some years ago, my first experience there. And what really struck me, while the food was incredible, the hospitality was incredible, no surprise, right? It's a 3 Michelin star restaurant. But the thing that really stood out to me was after dinner, our group was invited privately to do a tour of the kitchen and meet the chef de cuisine of the evening, to actually get to see prep, to walk behind the scenes, to feel like I really got to see the inner workings of the magic that made that experience happen. And that's what I walked away from, and that's what I really remembered, and I really felt connected to. And our hospitality experience at Kosta Browne is very much like that, and in that image. It's a literal peek behind the curtain. You literally get to walk on the catwalk and bump into Julian and talk to him and see that experience all in a private group, all while really creating memories and learning and being part of something. It's really unique. And I think that while we are not on a palatial vineyard, we're here in the Barlow in Sebastopol, which is very cool in and of itself. Our experience is quite different from others in the sense that it is really about the craft of making wine. It's really about the people. It's really about getting to really dig in and feel that piece. It's less about a beautiful view. It's more about a beautiful view of some pretty incredible winery equipment as I'm staring into the cellar as we speak. So that is my heartfelt 2 cents on why you should come visit us, which is, as Paige mentioned, is quite easy to do. Obviously, these are all by appointment. So go onto the website, and there's lots of great resources to give you a little bit of a visual peek behind the curtain, full calendar, all the details there. Kosta Browne/visit. So let's get back to wine, because I could talk about hospitality all day. Let's talk about the Cerise Pinot Noir, 2021 Cerise Pinot Noir. We talked a little bit about the vineyard. Tell us a little bit more, Julian, about this particular vintage of Cerise. For those that do or do not know, Cerise, the word is the French word for cherry. And I do not know if it is psychosomatic, but I swear to you, I always get a cherry note from this wine. It's just this, it's not a fleshy maraschino cherry. It's a very bright, freshly picked cherry flavor profile, which I get every vintage. So that's something about the terroir, I think.
Yeah, definitely. You know, as you two were both talking about hospitality and kitchens, and I was mesmerized by the smell of this, because it's like the harmony in the wine this year is exceptional, and it brought me to like when you're cooking and you're making like either a sauce or like a soup or like, something that takes a long time to cook down, and like you taste and you taste, and you taste, and the flavors just get deeper and deeper and deeper and darker and like more and more integrated. And then even sometimes it's good to leave it overnight, and then you eat it the next day. That's what this wine is reminding me of. It's so like so layered and deep, and there's a lot of different flavors going on. There's like definitely that fresh black cherry, dark cherry that I'm experiencing, and there's just this is really, I mean, I'm loving this wine right now.
The
2020,
finish on this, Julian.
what's that?
Ooh,
The
yeah.
finish.
The finish, the
Yeah.
This is
tannin.
going.
Usually Cerise is a more, certainly in this lineup specifically, but also just generally speaking, tends to be a little bit more on the tannic side, right? So if we're talking about all, it's not like a super tannic wine, but within the borders of Pinot, especially the ones we make, this has a little bit more tannin on it. Oftentimes, I think the Cerise, if you were going to choose to age one of the wines, the Cerise is a good wine to age because I think it just gets better with age. I mean, we started making Cerise in 2016, and to this day, the 16s, the 17s, the 18s, I mean, everything that is aged is tasting phenomenal. So, and I think that this wine is better than the 16s and 17s when they went to bottle. So I can only imagine where it's going to go. One of the reasons why I think it's, maybe, it's a little bit better in my opinion is we did a lot of replanting when we bought the vineyard in 2016. So, right away we replanted about a third of the vineyard, and that takes, 3 to 5 years to produce fruit again. So you have to pull the vines out, and then you plant the next spring. You usually plant the vineyard again, and then 3 years from then is when you get your first vintage of crop. And those young vines aren't always necessarily like top notch, ready to roll, the best, highest quality fruit. So 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, now we're talking about really good crop. So in 2021, which is the vintage we're tasting, that was the beginning of being able to experience some different new plantings, different clones. We planted some 23, some 37, because right now most of the vineyard is 115, Pommard, some Calera, some 2A. So we kind of now have a little bit more to work with. And in time, we're only going to have more and more clones and blocks and different things to work with. So, but yeah, this is really good, and it's reminding me of the deep flavor of a long, slow cooked, sauce, or even like a slow cooked, roast or something.
Shout out to the Calera clone. I saw you join, Mike. Mike is the winemaker for Calera Winery. I'm calling him out because I just saw him join our Instagram live and watching. But the Calera clone is a really neat story that the Calera Winery is actually the winery and the history of
Julian, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Regina. We lost audio on you there for a
Regina, we
second.
can't hear you.
Oh,
well, I was trying to
there you
make
go.
like such
There
an
we go.
impactful point, and
Yeah.
long story short, you do some research on the Calera clone. It's a really special part of winemaking history. There is the winery Calera, based in Hollister, California. Is the founder, Josh Jensen, is the one that cultivated and created and is credited with the Calera clone, hence named. And that clone is now planted, that Pinot Noir clone is now planted all over California. I believe there's plantings in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, Julian, and perhaps even internationally now as well.
Yeah.
So it's pretty neat
Yeah.
when the history of Pinot, and a great history to that. Okay, so as not to get us completely off track here, let's go ahead and jump into the Bootleggers Chardonnay. I should also mention, to Julian's point about older Pinot Noir and older Cerise in particular, we do have a tiny bit of the 2019 vintage for a wish only within the allocation for members that are participating in our estate offer. So definitely check that out if you're looking for a beautiful library vintage of that wine. Perhaps you purchased it before and you already drank it and you want to get another, go for it. But moving on to the Bootleggers Hill Chardonnay, Julian, if you could talk a little bit about bootleggers in general. And I'm still going to get to the bottom of why it's actually called bootleggers, because I'm sure there was some moonshine involved. So we'll talk about the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay, and then we can wrap with the Treehouse.
Yeah. Yeah, so Bootleggers Hill is a vineyard. It's a beautiful vineyard planted right on one of our, several, magical roads, the many beautiful roads of Sonoma County. So on Occidental Road, it's located about halfway between Highway 116 and the town of Occidental. And of course, from the 116 highway, the further west you go, I mean, every quarter mile, the climate is changing, like rather dramatically. And so is the terrain and the topography. So we're getting into, very hilly kind of countryside. And so you have a dynamic with the coast, the energy from the coast coming through and kind of, blowing wind, of course, and the fog. And then you have all the different exposures, north, west, south, you've got it all out there. So Bootleggers it's a beautiful little, it's a soft little gentle knoll. And so there is a 360-degree exposure. And the Chardonnay is planted on the north and the northwestern side of the vineyard. So cooler aspects of the vineyard. It's surrounded by these beautiful, old, tall, majestic redwoods. So it's a stunning kind of site just to go check out in the first place. It's got a long, long history of agriculture. It's grown, not only grapes in its history, but, all the stone fruits that Sonoma County has been known for, cherries, peaches, pears, and so it's got a long history. And the Chardonnays that come off of there are very, very, they've got this vibrancy, this energy that is, very, very distinct. And it's got a little bit more of the presence of the California sun. It's not particularly a warm site, it's not like Treehouse, which is a little bit of a warmer site in the sense that it gets a little hotter, but it's a site that it takes a long time to ripen. So, this is something that we pick typically in the middle of the season. And the sugar levels, which is something that we watch very closely, of course, during harvest, they tend to be on the upper limit of what we would consider to be ripe, right? And so they're producing 13.5 to 14% alcohol wines pretty easily. But you have to wait because the acidity is so piercingly, it's strong. So you can't really, pick it any earlier because then you've got too acidic of a wine. You have to kind of stretch those two limits and allow them to get ripe enough so the acidity is ripe enough. So the resulting wine is a really bright, beautiful, fresh, a lot of green apple, citrus, a little bit of brioche, like a really beautiful wine. But I would say personally, Cerise is a little bit more of a floral, stone-fruited wine, and the Chardonnay from Bootleggers is a little bit more of a citrus, but still has plenty of richness and is very, very smooth and long. And I think this is a really incredible wine.
Paige, I'm curious your comments too, as Julian started sort of comparing and contrasting the Cerise Chardonnay and the Bootlegger Chardonnay. What are your thoughts there? How would you compare these two wines, specifically from a flavor category? Of course, if you're offered both, buy both because they're so different. But if you were, what would you recommend if someone's looking for a particular flavor profile? How would you describe these two?
I would agree with Julian. I get a lot more citrus. I mean, ripe citrus, even Meyer lemon, a little bit. This is not a sweet wine, but that sweeter citrus that you kind of think of. And some really beautiful apple. The Bootlegger Chard for me, is a wine that I want to spend time with. It's really it's dynamic and layered in that way that every time you stick your nose in it, there's like, oh, there's a little something else there. There's a little something else there. Like every sip is like also that you want another sip to like tease out those additional flavors and kind of like figure out what's going on. And the acid on this wine, to Julian's point, I mean, I think you have some of those riper fruit notes, but the acid is just beautiful. I mean, so refreshing and long. So I think for me, the big difference between these two wines is I think I, well, this is hard for me. I love them both. We love all of our children. I think, the cerise is a little maybe like higher toned. The acid comes out in a little bit of a different way, whereas the bootlegger, it kind of develops as you go. And I think I would probably, gravitate towards some richer food with the bootlegger. I think both of these wines are beautiful on their own, but I think that the bootlegger kind of has the robustness to play with a lot more. And I think the cerise for me, I would probably gravitate more towards, seafoods and lighter foods, even, your appetizer courses. And I think the bootlegger can kind of develop throughout the meal as well, if we're looking at it that way. Yeah, if that answers your question.
It does. And I love that you're doing food pairings. One of my favorite things, and I'm now hungry.
I know. I keep thinking about food. I'm like, what would I eat with this?
It's time for lunch. Let's go ahead. Let's stay on that theme for a second, Paige, and let's talk about the bootlegger's Pinot and the Treehouse Pinot, and sort of similarly, the compare and contrast there and the flavor profiles. And Julian, jump in at any point and kind of tell us again, if there's any more specifically around bootleggers, the location. But I know you want to talk about that Treehouse too, so jump on in.
Yeah. So to start with the bootleggers, these two wines are mirror images of their climate in terms of, within the Russian River viewpoint. Both of them are going to be fruit forward. They're going to have, generous, approachable fruit characteristics. Bootleggers has a little bit of a, earthy component as well, but it's layered, it's tucked behind all this really beautiful, lush fruit. And the way I see it is when I taste the bootleggers, I get like a broader, more mellow kind of fruit spectrum. Everything tastes a little softer, a little bit more gentle, a little bit more chill. Everything is very, very easy with the bootleggers. With the Treehouse, it's a little bit more of a peak, right? Like it's a little bit more powerful. It's a little bit more acute, and it's I don't want to say it's louder, but like the flavors are like brilliant, and they're pure, and the color is brilliant, and like it's just there's just a different energy coming off of this Treehouse. Not to say that necessarily one is better than the other, but I would say that the bootleggers is a much chiller, kind of laid back wine, and the Treehouse is a little bit more of a much more energetic and outgoing. I tend to think about wines, but I think about wines in terms of its flavor and the different types of fruit and different foods that we can associate with. But I get a lot of energy from wines too. Sometimes I get personalities, and I think about different types of people or places. And so for me right now, the bootleggers is laid back. It's easygoing. It's chill. It's cool. And the Treehouse is definitely more energetic.
You have described the Treehouse as a Bon Jovi sliding on his knees into the opening lyrics of "Living on a Prayer." Still this vintage?
Always. It's like a classic rock and roll song.
It's like unapologetic. We're doing this.
And it's really good. And when I go, Treehouse is the wine that when you're tasting in the cellar, just casually with guests or whatever, you pour a little Treehouse and their heads turn. They go, "What is this? Like I've never tasted something like this before." Because it's unique. It's unique to, I think, California. It's unique to Russian River. It's unique. It's an extraordinary wine.
I will say that this particular vintage as well. It's the first time I've tasted this particular wine in a little while, and there's something very, we're sort of teasing about Bon Jovi, but Bon Jovi is not credited enough for his mastery of the art. May he always be so fantastic in all the things that he does. Sidebar. But there's a certain sophistication, actually. There's a real maturity, and I don't mean that in age of the wine. I mean in just the way in which it's expressing itself. There's a lot of nuance,
Mm.
particularly in this vintage that I'm picking up. There's a lot of layers of flavors there, but I agree with you. This is telling you who it is, whereas the bootlegger is a little more quiet. It's a little more subdued. It's a little
Hmm.
more,
I think,
in the shadow.
Julian, I like that you called out that it was really unique for Russian River, the treehouse, because I think the bootlegger for me, tasting these side by side right now, is a really exquisite expression of Russian River. You know, those layers of fruit and exactly what you're talking about. It's a really welcoming, generous wine. Um, but the treehouse has, some uniqueness to it that I don't find with other Russian River sites. And, some of those like herbaceous notes, some of the structure, the energy that you're talking about, I think that's really fascinating because the bootlegger is beautiful, but I think you would be like, yeah, this is Russian River. That makes sense. And the treehouse has a little bit of, it goes a little this way, in the best possible way, that has some things that I don't always associate with the region, which is cool. It's really fun to get to try them side by side like that because they're really not that far apart, right?
No, no, they're
Yeah.
very close. I mean, yeah, the treehouse is also a little bit of a knoll. So it's got 360-degree exposure as well, but it's a little further north and west, and it's got a very unique soil profile, and it tends to see more extreme temperature changes. So, going back to my comment about the being a reflection of the climate, you know, the climate at Bootleggers is a little bit more, you know, it's not as extreme, right? At Treehouse, it's it's foggy and cold in the morning. You can feel the coast, much like you can really feel it. And then as soon as the fog kind of burns off or the sun is, 10 o'clock in the morning, it gets hot. 11, 12, 1 o'clock, it is warm out there. And you wouldn't know you're in Russian River, but then by 3 o'clock again, you start to feel the air, and all of a sudden you see it, and by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a June or July afternoon, it's foggy and it's blowing and it's cold. So that's extreme hot and cold, and Bootleggers is more gentle, kind of like it's cooler overall, and it doesn't see the daytime highs, and the wine reflects that really, really well. So, um, you know, yeah.
And I think it's important to mention what you were touching on, Julian. All three of these vineyards, all three of our estate vineyards, the Cerise Vineyard, the Bootleggers Vineyard, and the Treehouse Vineyard, all three of these vineyards are within 20 miles of the Pacific Ocean. So there's a true cooling influence, which, philosophically we think is really important when it comes to making Pinot Noir specifically, and Chardonnay as well. Just not working with sites that are going to be overly exposed to really, really hot temperatures or really difficult mold pressure or anything like that. When you have that proximity to the Pacific Ocean, that's a sort of a cooling influence. You can get those, as Julian was describing, you can get those diurnal shifts. You can get those changes, which reflect really, really magically in the wine. I mean, that's the art of vineyard planting and growing and cultivating the grapes.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've made it through all five. Any final thoughts, from Paige or from Julian? I have a final thought.
Well, I mean, my one of my favorite might not be my final, but one of them is that this is truly an exceptional vintage. 2021 is the wines that we're gonna remember for a long time, and we're gonna be enjoying these for another 15, 20 years. Take my word. And these are our, most prized places. So, Cerise, Bootleggers, and Treehouse are all absolutely extraordinary vineyards on an extraordinary vintage. So, I don't know. Get it while you can, I guess, right? I mean, this is good stuff. And
Paige?
Yeah, I would
it's a
say,
hands-off approach. These are terroir wines. These
Very true.
we're not doing anything crazy. The hardest part about winemaking is not doing, right, not intervening, not getting in the way. So these wines are a reflection of the growers, the people who are doing all the work in the vineyard, and we're just simply trying to make the best wine possible from the grapes, and they're extraordinary. So that's my final.
I'm just super excited. I mean, these wines are so beautiful right now, to see how they develop. Getting to taste, our older vintages on a more regular basis and listening to how Julian's speaking to like the 16 and 17s, and the 17s are showing beautifully right now. So with the idea of thinking of the 21 as an even better potential vintage, to see where these wines are in a few years, knowing how these older wines are drinking now is just really, really exciting. So when you are buying your allocation, if you can bear to set a few aside, I would, because I think, these are the kind of wines that I try and I'm like, oh wow, okay, it's cool now that I really want to see what this grows up to be.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Thank you to you both. I have a final thought to string together all of the incredible one-liners that we've had this afternoon.
Oh no.
Nobody hit me on my iambic pentameter, but to a certain extent, a haiku. Come visit us at KB, spend time with Bootlegger Shard, go full mallow, and feel the heat. And with that,
feel the heat.
Cheers, everybody.
Feel the heat.
Cheers. Great afternoon. Thanks for joining us.